Good morning, church family. It's Candace Ulmer here with an expression of gratitude for Habitat for Humanity. Our church provides financial support for Habitat through its annual budget. And this week we'll visit with Earl Kemp. So Dr. Kemp, tell us about the work Habitat does in the Sioux Falls community.
Sure. Well, one of the things that one of the former directors used to say quite frequently, and I think it's in some of their literature as well, is that Habitat gives a hand up, not a hand out. And what we're talking about here is that we help families who are in a situation where their living quarters are inappropriate, too crowded, too expensive, inappropriate in other ways. Gives them an opportunity to get into a decent, affordable, and safe place to live. These are not gifts. These are homes that the families have to purchase, and the prices are based on the assessment of the property itself. Once the house is all done, it's assessed, and that determines how big their mortgage will be. The big advantages are, number one, they put in hours of work, which I think the current number is 300 hours of sweat equity. And so that reduces or eliminates the down payment, and then their mortgages are interest-free. So the amount that they're paying is oftentimes much less than what they're paying in terms of rent, and they end up with a house that they actually own themselves. I have a couple of numbers here that might be fun. Habitat so far has built over 160 houses in Sioux Falls, in the Sioux Falls area, and that accommodates 246 adults and 637 kids. In addition, Habitat in Sioux Falls sponsors a program known as the Neighborhood Revitalization Program, or A Brush with Kindness, and these are projects for updating homes and people who are low income. And they also have to pay a portion of the cost of those projects. We also have something known as the Restore, which many chapters around the country have as well. These are facilities where people can donate, for example, used cabinets when you're doing a kitchen remodel. And those are then put up for sale. And so two good things happen. One, a lot of stuff stays out of the dump that would otherwise have gone there. And secondly, it raises funds, which in our community essentially pays about the cost of materials for one house each year, which is really kind of neat. The other thing that's helpful with the income that's raised there is that each chapter has to provide each year for its own expenses. So all the administrative costs of every chapter of Habitat has to raise its own costs to pay its own expenses every year. All of the funds that go into housing stay in housing. So when a Habitat homeowner pays back their mortgage, all of the mortgage money goes into materials for future houses, and that's how Habitat has grown. And Habitat International has exceeded 1 million houses in the world already. I think that's just been about a year or two ago that happened, but it's pretty neat. Habitat for Sioux Falls, this chapter covers 3 counties, Minnehaha, Lincoln, and Clay, I believe, is the 3rd county, but this area. And there are other chapters of Habitat in South Dakota as well.
So how long have you been supported by First Presbyterian Church?
Actually, First Pres was involved in bringing Habitat to Sioux Falls. The original organizational meetings for Habitat in Sioux Falls were actually held in this very church. One of the main instigators at that time was our own John Bilsma, and actually John and Paula both were involved, and there is a portion of Sioux Falls up north known as the Bilsma Addition, which was a Habitat area that was built. but it was named after them for their work in that regard. One other major mover was Denny Erickson, who probably is to blame for me getting involved in Habitat in the first place.
So what's your personal connection to Habitat for Humanity?
Well, I was trying to figure out when I actually started with them, and I'm not entirely certain, but it was over 25 years ago, working with our church when our church groups had projects to work on. I can remember, though, that we got involved with a blitz build. Some of you probably remember that because a lot of our congregation was involved with it. And would you believe that was in 2009 already? Prior to that time, I had gotten involved thinking, gee, wouldn't it be neat for all of the churches in town to get together and do something? And so I went to the different churches, Presbyterian churches in Sioux Falls, and we collectively put together a project known as the Presby House. All the churches collectively provided the funds for the materials, and all the churches collectively provided the workers. And we worked every Saturday and every Wednesday evening until we got the house done. That house is on South Menlo. It's sort of fun to drive by some of these houses and see what they look like these days. So we've been involved with that for a long time. I had the privilege of serving on the board of directors of Habitat. I'm not entirely sure, but it was prior to 2012, because one of our actions as a board was 10 by 12, 10 houses per year by 2012, which we did accomplish, although it's been hard to maintain at that level. So I think this past year, I think we were at 8 instead of 10. But it's an ongoing project. When I retired from full-time medical practice, I joined a group known as the Masters Builders. That's master with apostrophe S. So I don't claim to be a master carpenter or anything like that. But these are a bunch of retired guys that work every Tuesday and Thursday, wherever we're needed. I will say that a lot of these guys are so good they could be called master builders. I don't consider myself one of those. But we learn a lot. We have a good time working together. They're a wonderful group of people. And then just recently this year, I've joined the Family Services Committee, which is involved in the selection process, filtering through all the applicants and make sure they meet all the criteria necessary. So in another year from now, I'll know a lot more about how that process works. I know just a bit about it at this time.
Mm-hmm. So what has First Presbyterian support meant for this organization?
Well, I think without First Pres being involved, we may not have had a chapter in Sioux Falls nearly as soon as we did. I think it eventually would have come. But that's been really important. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, every chapter has to raise its own funds for administrative expenses every year. And that is what a portion of our budget goes to every year. Since we started having projects that we maintained over time, Habitat has been involved as one of those. And so we contribute to their administrative costs every year. When we've been involved in those other special projects, then that was additional fundraising that was necessary in order to buy the materials for those houses.
So tell us a personal story that shows the heart of Habitat and its mission in Sioux Falls.
Well, there are many of these. One kind of fun thing for me was a fellow by the name of, he goes by TK because none of us can pronounce either his first or his last name. It's not all that hard actually, but I'm not going to try it here. We worked on his house a year ago. He got into it a year ago last winter. Just a really neat fellow. He had been a teacher in Africa before he came to the U.S. When he got here, he felt that there was more he could be doing, and so he went back to school and got a nursing degree in RN. And so he is now a full-time RN. And when my sister-in-law had hip surgery, she went to the rehab program a Vera Prince of Peace, and guess who her night nurse was? It was TK. So that was my reconnection with him after not having visited with him for about a year. So that was fun. One of the other really neat things, there is a duplex that we built this past year down in Harrisburg. Before the COVID thing came around, we got to visit and work with the future homeowners. And so I got to know both Emma and Yemi, who are the two women who are going into two sides of this home. One of the fun things about this particular project is they each had a 6-year-old boy who had not met one another last time that I heard. But they have met now because they have both gotten to move in. I have a picture here of Yemi and her son Christian at their house dedication. That was last winter. The other couple, Emma and her son Liam, didn't get to move in then because Emma was laid off with the COVID crisis. She's now back working again, so she did get to move into her house. She had to have a house, job, so she could pay for her mortgage. And so I'm anxious to visit with them now that the boys have met one another and see how that's going. And I have an appointment to do that this weekend, so I'm looking forward to that. It's just a wonderful experience to work with these folks. You get hugs at their dedications, you get hugs on the street, you get all sorts of fun feedback, and there are many stories I could tell, but I probably can't do that now.
Thank you, Dr. Earl Kemp, for sharing about Habitat for Humanity.